It was around 12:30 a.m. when I go outside to throw away the garbage, and the first thing I see is a woman in her 20s facing the corner of the wall of the house, as if she was being punished. And the only thing I see is her long black hair that is reaching her lower back. She was wearing a short black leather skirt and sleeveless blouse. It was quite cold outside, so I was wondering if she was alright. She wasn't crying. She was not sad. She was not waiting for anyone. She was just quiet. "Hey, can I help you?" No response. "Are you waiting for someone?" Again, no response. "Are you okay?" She didn't budge or make a single noise. I wanted to tap on her shoulder to get to the bottom of this, but I decided to do that after I threw away the garbage. In an unlikely case where she decides to attack me and I happen to have 2 full garbage bags. I walked around the corner, and when I came back, she was gone. My porch was clear. She obviously did not pass me, so she must have went in the other way, and to be honest with you, I was glad she was gone. I go inside the house, lay on my bed, and it's really late at night, and I remember one very important thing. The street was empty on the other side, and no one was there, which means there was only one place the woman could have gone into: my home. I immediately grabbed the hunting knife I received as a gift for my 18th birthday and head out to search for the stranger in my home. I walk around silently, checking each room, under every table, inside every closet, and even in the basement. As I'm walking upstairs, I hear quick, heavy footsteps running. I rush to the scene, trying to catch up to this person to confront her. I check my surroundings, and everything seemed okay. I found the front door open with the wind rustling through the gap. I go outside, and I see the woman in the distance running away, fading into the darkness. She never came back, and I never saw her again. Thankfully, nothing was stolen, and more importantly, no one was hurt. Reading some of the stories on here reminded me of something that happened during my holidays this past Christmas. I went on a family holiday with my mom, dad, and brother to Tasmania, which is kind of like a big island to the south of Australia. I wasn't terribly interested in the trip, just wanted to spend some time with the family, so I left all the booking to my dad. And I'll never do that again. He has his own Airbnb he manages, so I thought he would be able to find a decent place on his own. When we walked up to the Airbnb my dad had booked, the first thought I had was, if I wanted to sell drugs, I would do it here. My mom wasn't impressed at all, and was already telling my dad off for booking it. I didn't say anything. Maybe the inside is nicer. It was a dingy little house. The paint was peeling, roof was rusty, and there were plants overgrown to the side of the building. There were 3 entrances. The first one was the entrance for the host. It looked okay, not as bad as our entrance, a little tidier. It went downstairs, so after a while we figured out that the host most likely lived below us. The second entrance looked like it was the main entrance to the house, but it was sealed shut. The door looked like it would break down if anyone was even to push on it lightly, and it was obviously unused. The third entrance was ours, and besides the overgrown plants, it was fairly normal. We figured out later that it looks like the host had divided up the house somehow. She lives below, we live upstairs, but there was another half of the house upstairs that wasn't accounted for. Hard to explain, but the space we occupied only accounted for half of the house and only went up to the main entrance I spoke of, which was in the middle of the house. We checked in, basically just grabbed the keys. The host has never contacted us up to this point. All was well on the inside. It looked a little old, but wasn't creepy from the get-go. I did notice some odd things, and I only mentioned this to my dad. There were a bunch of antique instruments displayed on the entrance, and right on top of one of the pianos were 3 things that looked like urns. Now to explain, I am of Chinese descent. And those urns freak the fuck out of me. Some people think that they are for displaying, but we use them to store dead people's ashes. So I really didn't like them being there. I told my dad, and he didn't like it either. He went to tap on the urn to see if something was actually in it, but he couldn't tell. But he mentioned that the one that he had tapped was definitely one used for ashes. It had scripts on it for like safe passage to heaven, from what I could make out. After I stopped freaking out, I went and picked first dibs on the biggest room, as per my usual, but noticed that there were heaps of mirrors all around the room. Again, another thing, not sure if this is a Chinese thing, but we don't like sleeping with mirrors facing us when we're in bed, if we can help it. So I went to move one of the mirrors, which was right in front of the bed. It was leaning against the door, so when I took the mirror off, the door actually opened ajar a little bit. That freaked me out. I got my dad, and we decided it's better I slept with my mom in another room, and he would take this room with my brother. Again, my dad being dad, he opened the door a little and shouted, "Hello?" before I told him to shut up. I had a peek inside, but couldn't make out much. Only that it was dusty and seemed to be a part of the other half of the house. My dad soon put a chair and a suitcase on top of it, in front of the door to keep it shut. Fast forward to the night, everyone was sleepy and went to bed. I stayed up a bit because I had some emails from work to catch up on, and I went to go work in the living room. At this point, it was around 11 p.m. I remember that there were a few thumps on the roof, which sounded like footsteps, then followed by the loudest, most horrendous noise. It sounded like a train stopped on top of me. It was screeching like steel on steel that lasted maybe 30 seconds. I froze at this point, didn't know what to do. I thought that my dad would come check on me, but he never did. I didn't say anything the next morning because I thought I may have imagined it out of my tiredness. The following night, same thing, except I was in bed this time, just got into it. It was around this time that the same exact noise started up again. My mom woke up, but was frozen like me. My dad came in to check on us, and we were all just frozen listening to the noise, wondering what the hell it was. After it stopped, we were freaked out, but managed to shrug it off and went to sleep. Before I fell asleep, I remember hearing some faint thumps that stopped shortly after it started. The next morning, we kind of had a meeting of some sorts to discuss this. This is when I told them about the night before. We were all extremely unsettled at this point, and luckily, it was checkout day. We got the hell out of there and never found out what it was. The creepiest thing was, after we packed up and were well away from this place, Dad was driving, but he looked really disturbed. So I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "I am now, but I did not have good sleep last night." I pressed on and asked him, was it the noise? He said no, that didn't bother him as much compared to another thing that he had experienced. What bothered him the most was, when he left for our tour on the second day, he still had the suitcase on the top of the chair blocking the door in his room. He had just showered, so he had left the towel on the chair to hang. He said that when he came back, he noticed that the door was slightly ajar, the chair had been moved slightly, and the towel was now on the floor, as if someone was trying to push it from the other side. I forced him to ask the host about the noise on the other side of the door. She replied that the door was to her art room, and the noises just were a possum on the roof. I don't really believe her. The noises did not seem like some animal. I work from home, doing beauty treatments. Last summer, I was working 6 to 7 days a week, 9:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m., doing nails and drowning in a god-awful chemical smell. I would end each night airing my house out with all the windows open for a few hours. One night I sat on my sofa while the place airs and browsing on my laptop for TV unit. I had just moved a few months before. As I slouched down on the sofa, A creepy feeling rolls over me. Something at the corner of my eye catches my attention. I look to my window and I notice that my blinds are bent inwards, revealing a black slit of the outside. I stare deeply into the darkness, trying to figure out if my blinds got caught, when I hear a man's voice say, "Hey there." I instantly look away, heart pounding. The blinds fall back into place and I hear fading footsteps as he walks away. God only knows how long he had been standing there, watching me. I was so terrified and immediately rushed around and closed all my windows. When I was closing the window to my beauty room, I noticed a man a few meters away, crouched down and shining a torch under the tree. A few minutes later, there was tapping on my now closed kitchen window. I didn't check it out. I was too scared. I still don't know if the guy under the tree was the guy that said "hey there," or someone just looking for a lost pet perhaps. There was also a guy who had been going around, beating and mutilating cats around the same time. So I was extra on edge and called the non-emergency line to log it and slept with a knife that night. Okay, so last year I was coming home late, 11:30 or so. Just me and my roommate lived there. I'm the only one home at the time. I go to the kitchen to make dinner and get halfway upstairs. I hear a pounding at the door. I never answer the door because I never invite anyone over, so I just ignored it. I turn the hallway light off and the pounding gets worse. "I know you're in there. Don't ignore me." I quickly close the bedroom door. I somehow move heavy furniture in front of the bedroom door, a big chest of drawers, and I grab a hammer. The pounding gets louder and louder, as if the person was throwing his body against a very solid door. I call my mom, who then tells me to call the cops. The noise had stopped right when I called the cops. I tell them that someone's trying to break into my home, and just then the noise starts up again. The screaming and yelling, throwing his body against the door. Slightly nervous that the stranger might use the sliding glass door, which my roommate never locks. And thank God it was locked this time. I stay on the phone with the dispatcher as the guy keeps yelling off his head. I can see his car still from my window. "I saw you turn out the lights. I know you're in there. Let me in. I'm sorry. Let me the fuck in, you bitch." Well, by the time the cops came, the man had already left. I somehow get downstairs to talk to the cop. They end up finding the guy parked down the street from the house. They ask if I know him. I didn't, but my roommate does. It's her daughter's boyfriend, who I came to apologize about smashing and breaking her hand in the car door. Well, they didn't arrest him because he didn't really do anything. I ended up filing for a restraining order against the guy. This was about 2 years ago. I worked at a hair salon and a restaurant opened right next to our store. The food was pretty good, and we would stop there for lunch once in a while. Well, every now and then the dishwasher would come out from the back of the restaurant to watch us. Didn't bother us, just watched us. He always seemed kind of creepy to me from the get-go. Wore a big clear apron around himself, and it just looked grimy. Hair unkempt, dirty mustache, really old. One day I went by myself and was short on cash to get some extra chicken for my burrito, so I opted not to get it. I take my food back to the salon. All of a sudden, one of the other employees comes back and gets me a thing of chicken. The dishwasher guy came in and said he wanted you to have this. Great. I kind of was confused by this, as the guy seemed strange. I didn't eat the chicken. Well, one day, I'm walking back to my car and noticed the cops around. Someone had gotten arrested in the parking lot, so I kind of take my time getting to my car. Well, who walks up to me but the dishwasher guy? He tries to strike up a conversation with me, How are you? How was work? Why are the cops here? I made up answers quick. Are you seeing anyone? I reply yes. I'm in a relationship with my boyfriend. I quickly say goodnight and get in my car and leave. Figured it was the end of that, but nope. This is how our meetings went. He tried to talk to me, and I'd get in my car. He'd make sure to take out the trash the same times I always did. I used to acknowledge him, wave once or twice, try to be nice, but it got so repetitive, and he tried to watch me in the restaurant, like purposely walk out of the back. I didn't go out as often, or would have someone else pick up my food. The big joke at the salon was my creepy boyfriend. We all joked about it. We all knew he had put me on edge, but hadn't done anything bad yet. So I started to ignore him. Well, the dishwasher guy got even stranger. He started watching me work through the salon window after he would take out the trash, just standing there. Thank God I have a male employee to walk me to my car at this point. And when that didn't work, I would go to the coffee shop next door and have one of them walk me to my car. I was starting to get anxious about running into this guy because I would always randomly run into him. The dishwasher guy came in one day when I was off and seemed disappointed, but he got a haircut from one of the other stylists. Well, the restaurant wasn't doing well at this point, and the guy just spends his days watching me. The day before the restaurant closes permanently, the dishwasher guy comes up to the salon freaking out that he needs to talk to me. My coworkers basically tell him that I'm busy. After the restaurant closed down, I never saw this guy again. This happened when I was really young on a military base. All my life I thought it was just a weird and terrifying reoccurring dream until I mentioned it to my parents when I was a teenager. They admitted that it was completely real, and they just didn't tell me all this time because they didn't think it would matter to know if it was true. I was playing on the playground and my older sister was nearby, but not playing with me. There was an officer's son by me though, and he started somewhat being nice. I remember him looking at me really close in the face and getting a big smile before he says, "You have really pretty eyes." Now, little me is super happy and says thank you, and that's nice of you. Probably some vague compliment back. He was only a few years older than me. By the looks of it, neither of us were older than 10. He grabs a blunt stick that was lying next to me and pins me to the ground and starts trying to gouge out my eyes within seconds. And it's at this point that I'm stupidly staring at him, confused and worried. I'd never encountered violence like this in my life, and before I knew it, the kid was holding my scrawny ass down and was talking about how he was gonna physically take my eyes away from me. It's then I start to panic because, can you even take an eye away from people? My sister shoves him off of me and gets me up to run with her away from him to our house. There wasn't anything we felt we could do when we told our parents because, again, it's an officer's son. When I'm a teen and all this is coming to light, they told me that they did talk to the officer. They told him what his son did and that they didn't want it to happen again, but the dad was pretty entitled about it, and we just ended up not going out to play as much until the kid moved away. Little psychopath grown up, please let's not meet. You've left many nightmares. When I was younger, about 8 or 9, my mom would usually drop me and my friends off at a public pool. One of my friends was about 3 years older than me, so I guess my mom thought we would be safe on our own. One day, me, my friend, her friend, and her friend's older brother decided to go to the public pool with us. My friend's mom dropped us off at the pool this time, and it wasn't the public pool we usually go to, but we were familiar with it. When we first entered the pool, we picked a nice spot for us to sit. It didn't take long until I noticed a man constantly staring at us. I didn't tell my friends at first. I forgot about it and finally got into the pool. We had lots of fun. After spending the whole day at the pool, we decided to leave. My friend called her mom and asked her if she could come pick us up. We grabbed our things and headed towards the entrance. As we were heading towards the entrance, I noticed the man that was staring at us earlier, and my heart dropped. He was following us as we made our way out to the pool's entrance. Right when we finally made it out, I heard my friend yelp. I turned only to see the strange man grabbing her arm. He was trying to drag her along with him, but my friend wouldn't budge. I freaked out, and so did my other two friends. We started screaming and shouting until two lifeguards came. They pulled the man away and began questioning him. The man ran away and the staff waited with us until we were picked up. Let's never meet again, sir. I just got off work. Today I worked 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Around 10:45 a man walks in. I've had previous odd encounters with this man, such as seeing him walk behind me around the neighborhood and him hanging out near my street. I had brushed those off since I live right next to where I worked and figured that he just lived there also, but I always kept my eye on him. Anyway, the man comes in and orders his regular pastry and tells me, I'm gonna stay inside and eat my pastry. For anyone who doesn't know, my country is currently under lockdown because of the coronavirus, and all dining indoors is strictly prohibited. Not to mention the bakery is very tiny, and there had never been any tables to sit inside, only a coffee bar that has never had space to sit. I tell him, we're on lockdown, you can't really eat inside. His response chills me. Are you alone here? Yes. I respond stupidly, but quickly try to catch myself. But my coworker will be here soon. A complete lie. It was only 11 a.m. and my coworker isn't scheduled until 1 p.m. when I'm off. Then no one will see me in here. He responds and goes back to eating his pastry at the coffee counter. I roll my eyes and go back to work, not getting paid enough to care if he quickly eats his pastry and leaves. 10 minutes pass, then 15. This guy is still in my bakery. I look over and he finished his pastry and has moved closer to the open space in the counter, meant for employees to walk back and forth between the front of the store and the employees only side. Now I start getting uncomfortable. I quickly text my coworker, who is a 30-year-old man who owns a lot of guns and treats me like a little sister. I look over again, and now the man is even closer and is now reading a book. He's putting the book in front of his face and peeking at me from above it, watching me. Multiple customers had come in during his stay. Every time I turn my back, he gets closer and closer, until eventually he's halfway in our employees only area. I begin frantically texting my coworker, and he tells me he's about 4 minutes away. I finally make the decision to text my boyfriend. I had avoided doing so to keep from scaring him, but now I was terrified. I sat in the back of the employee area, watching this guy. I held a knife just in case he decided to come any closer. Just as he takes a few steps closer, my coworker bursts through the door. A confrontation ensues, and the man leaves the shop, but continues to sit in a parked car right out in front and stares at me. I tell my coworker about the previous experiences I have had with him, and he had enough. He marches out to the guy's car and tells him the next time he comes around, it would be his last. My boyfriend pulls up at this point and joins in with a warning. So Matthew, aka my stalker, let's not meet again. Okay, so I'm 14 and am most often mistaken for an 18-year-old because of my shape. For a little context, I was at the YMCA with my sister. We were swimming for a while, and then I started to feel sick. My younger sister said, "You don't look good. Maybe you should go sit in the changing room for a while." Yeah, I think I will. I went to the changing room for some peace and quiet, and luckily for me, no one was in there. I sat on one of the benches and closed my eyes. A few moments later, I could hear someone come in. It was a guy, tall, muscular, and generally good looking. I brushed it off thinking he was probably waiting for his girlfriend and came in to check because she was taking too long or something. That was until he approached me and sat right next to me, so close that our thighs were touching. I was really surprised and scooted over and gave him that "what do you think you're doing" look. He smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, girl, I'm not gonna hurt you," and proceeded to put his hand on my back. I stood up and backed away. I was too scared to run because he seemed athletic, so he probably would have caught me. He asked me, "How old are you, baby?" in a sickening sweet tone. I say 14, and he nonchalantly says, "Cool." So I asked how old he was. 23. He stood up and started walking over to me, and I backed up away from him. This is the turning point. I hear a bathroom stall open, and there standing in all her glory was a lady who I call my hero. She stepped out, and I knew she heard everything. The dude hightailed it out of there. The lady was nice and stayed with me for a while. Her name was Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. Back in 2018, I had a bad fever. The kind of fever that will make you wake up in the middle of the night, freezing your ass off, and the next thing you're sweating. Anyways, fast forward. My room is closest to the front door. It was 3 a.m. and I was still awake because I couldn't sleep. All of a sudden I hear someone semi-aggressively trying to open the front door. I live with my parents, so I thought it was my brother coming home, so I called out his name. The doorknob continued turning, and I hid in my bed terrified. A few minutes later, I told my dad, and he could see the door had been mangled with. That day he installed cameras, and no lie, about a month later we caught a man on camera trying to open the basement door this time. I really regret not looking out my window to try to spot the man, but I was terrified. It also freaks me out that if that night someone had left the door unlocked, a stranger would have been lurking in my house, with my door being the first one. So a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years. He retired and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though he didn't need the money, between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place back in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember that date well because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some experience on the road, both at day and night. I was sitting at my usual spot at the table that was set up alongside the window, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table, along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evenings like that, reading books, getting up to run the register, or stock the coolers at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up to our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. This in itself was really strange because of where we were located. You didn't see much people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came inside the store, looked around for a few minutes. I remember getting a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the next town up north. My dad let her know that he was working and there was no way he could take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she's looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and suddenly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns her back to my dad and points at me, asking if I could take her. My dad responded back that I only had my learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, but I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with customers. For whatever reason, he was dismissive of her. Turns out, he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he saw her walking up the drive. Well, she cusses him out for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door so hard that it opened back up, and I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it. Then she just stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back to the interstate and then starts up the northbound ramp. Almost a year passes and I'm in my bedroom. Less than a week before my 16th birthday, I hear my dad yelling from his room. "Son, get your ass in here. Look at this." I quickly run to the living room to see my dad pointing at the TV. On the TV was a mugshot of the lady, and I immediately remembered her as the lady from the store. Turns out I almost gave a ride to Eileen Wuornos, the real lady from Monster, the movie. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside of the suburbs. It seemed like it had the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel so isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my house feel even more quaint on the dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so I'm pulling up into my house. I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of the car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. This is weird because I had never smelled cigarettes around my house before. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I just ignored it and went inside. I had just come off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I had even given him a spare key so that he could stop by even when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from the phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before the phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There was a couple of seconds of silence before I heard a loud footfall as someone started to run through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran into the closet. They were already upstairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started lifting myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back into the hallway and into another room, which just had some boxes in the corner, some weights, and a table where I painted miniature models. I guess they decided if someone was hiding, it would be the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, I hear the closet door ripped open. I was just crouching in the attic, just a foot away or so from the access, so that I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from the room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. The scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clattering of items as things were thrown around and my furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet. I wasn't certain if I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped over my bed. I assume an attempt to find me. That was a loud noise I heard as he stepped away from the closet before he screamed. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa was flipped, all books and pictures and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. All the cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and the boxes of canned foods had been thrown on the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing I was missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along the fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think that he was watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected the evidence and told me that I should stay with my family or friends for the night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved the shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning up things. I would often go to the window with a flashlight to shine along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I never saw anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and the side of my house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to get stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else ever happened in the house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of bed and going to the closet and climbing into the attic as quickly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go into a crawl space. I try not to think about what would have happened if I was a bit slower to getting into the attic, or if he hadn't gone to the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband went out of town. They have a teenage daughter. Let's name her Alyssa. At like 3 a.m. I'm waking up by a weird rustling sound and look out my window to see some movement. I saw a boy emerge from the bushes on the side of the house. I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was it was a burglar casing the house. But since he looked young and came through on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops straight away. I went on the porch, flipping the lights on. "Can I help you?" The guy looked surprised, but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him from the streetlight, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, looked gruff, and more wiry than athletic. He walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping that he'd realized he'd come looking for a girl late at night, and a grumpy old person answered that it would be time to split. I'm thinking what must have happened is, Alyssa knew her parents were going to go out of town, and maybe before she knew I'd be staying over, she told her secret older boyfriend to come over. It was late and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird that he came so late and wanted to be sure Alyssa actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Alyssa. You know, Alyssa Johnson. This is her house." I thought he knew her full name. They must at least be friends. I said, "You wait here." He started walking up and I felt a sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in. I yelled, "No, stop, freeze." Then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. Wait there." So I go in and Alyssa is asleep, just one room over from where the rustling first occurred, and I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know whose big idea it was to have friends over at this time, but you gotta tell them to go home." She had no clue what I was talking about. I told her, "There's a guy outside asking for you." Confused, she gets up and goes to the window. She sees him and goes white as a sheet. "He asked for me?" "Yeah." "By name?" "Yes." "Call the police. I've never seen him in my life." I called 911 immediately. But as I was on the phone with them, Alyssa started tugging on my arm. "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it open just enough so I could yell. I asked my husband, and nobody knows Alyssa Johnson, "Leave my property or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and while he heard sirens, he grabbed his bike and rode off. I watched where he was going, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights on or front plates and sped off. The police followed in the same direction once I told them, but they didn't get him. They advised us to take all of her social media details offline if she was sure she didn't know the person, and said that there was a couple similar reports recently and they were looking into it. I got a heavy lock on my door and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit. So this is one of my experiences from working as an overnight security guard at my local port. This did not happen to me firsthand. It happened to one of my coworkers. But since that incident happened during my shift, I would fear to even go into the restroom alone. So just a recap on setting. The local port has a radius of nearly 2 miles, and there are 3 overnight security guards on the shift, including me. We're all at the front gate post, and it's about the size of a trailer home. The front gate post is separated from everything else in the site. Buildings, slabs, offices, the oil rigs, everything. It's the entry point to the entire industrial park. The offices and restrooms are about walking distance from our post. And it's really dark since there wasn't any lights around. Around 2 a.m., the lieutenant walks out of the post to go use the restroom. The restrooms are deep in the center of the offices, and the offices carry a very creepy vibe because they were constructed around the 1950s. About 7 minutes later, me and Mike look out the post window to find our lieutenant sprinting back to our post. At first we thought it was hilarious since he's a chubby dude, so we found it funny to watch him run. Then the realization started kicking in. The lieutenant was the only one who let out the fact that the site was haunted. He said he had seen things, and that it didn't really startle him much anymore. We slowly began to imagine and wondering what the fuck he had seen or heard to scare the shit out of him like this. I mean, it must have been bad enough for him to be running back in a very hysterical manner. The lieutenant opens the door to the post that me and Mike are in. We are both speechless and just staring at him as he catches his breath. After catching his breath, he tells us, "This is the last time I will ever use those restrooms in the office building. I was taking a shit in the 3rd stall, and then I heard the restroom door swivel open. I thought it was one of you, so I simply ignored it. But the thing is, I didn't hear any footsteps. I was listening to music, but I paused it to see if I could hear anything. A few seconds went by, and nothing. And then I heard the water faucet go off by itself. And then, a few seconds later, the air dryer went off as well. I finished my business and I ran back as fast as I could because I knew it wasn't either you in there. Creepiest part about this is that both the water faucet and hairdryer both were motion activated, so in order for them to go off, something had to trigger it. Before this incident, I was already skeptical about using the restroom alone. I hated taking shits at work during the night shift because I was always anticipating for something creepy like this to happen to me. The worst part is when you're taking a shit, you're in a vulnerable position. Also, those restrooms are way too deep in the building, and it's pitch black inside. You need a flashlight to go inside, and it's very quiet and creepy. This is another event that happened, and it's probably the creepiest one. The veteran guards that had been there for years would often say that their site was very haunted, given the fact that there had been accidents and deaths that occurred there a long time ago. I was aware that people died due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm a religious person, but I just always thought the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 or 6 nights a week, and for the first few weeks I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrols. Nothing too crazy. Just to describe the settings to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions, when there are big projects being constructed at the port, the workers sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where the port workers were required to stay there for a few days, there was a gym in the site for their convenience. The gym was fairly old. It had a sauna, weights, a racquetball court. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, Mike and I decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball on the cage. It's around 2 a.m. The entire building is so quiet that you could hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is cut off, and so is everything else. The only thing running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We brush it off as nothing and continue our workout. Then after a few minutes, we heard a loud thump once more. At first we thought it was just our lieutenant, which could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was the front gate. We tried thinking logically on what could be making those thumping sounds on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought that it was the air conditioning unit, but then remembered it was off. And even when it switched on during the day, there has never been a report of thumping coming from the air conditioning unit. After a few minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me till this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym, where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlights and aimed it towards the clear glass door. And I got chills all over my body, and started to tear up, so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means that the loud thumps were the ball mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if someone or something was playing in the cage. We were both confused and frightened to how this could be really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless and started yelling and running, because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked us why we were crying and running in a ridiculous manner. We told him what we had witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why guards quit so often. There's something evil in the area, and this is not the first time something bad like this has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas, and lights mysteriously switching on and off. Till this day, I still get chills recounting my experiences with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was just a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long at that job after that. This happened back in 2004, in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time and out deer hunting with my dad and his friend Frank. I do remember this day like it was yesterday though. The dialogue isn't word for word, but the idea of it is 100% accurate. As a side note, it was one day after 8 people were shot, less than 2 hours away. My dad and I had a few different stands over an area of maybe 3/4 square mile. We had been hunting there for almost 10 years, and I had been going with him since I was about 5. Up until I was 12, I had just been tagging along. This particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m., so still dark outside. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to the other stands over the ridge, maybe another 500 to 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always a little eerie. Not long after my dad and Frank left, I see a flashlight from the general direction of where they were headed, maybe 200 yards away, and roughly moving in my direction. I figured they forgot something from the truck or something, so I radioed to see what they were doing. We're sitting here in my stand. Frank is in the other one. So obviously the flashlight was from someone else. It isn't super uncommon and isn't really a big deal. Those woods get crowded sometimes, and there's a spot to park in that general direction. I turned on my light so the other hunter could see that there was someone there. He stopped. I see the light turn and go in a different direction. No big deal. I ended up dozing off for a while, since it was still dark. When I wake up, the sun is up. It's around 8 a.m. I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's seen or heard anything moving. Nothing yet. A couple of gunshots off in the distance is all. I get up to go for a slow walk to get my blood moving a bit. Not far, maybe 30 yards out and back. Trying not to make a sound. I come back to my stand, sit down, and take a real good look around. Nothing's really going on. I finally look at my left, where I'd seen the flashlight before, and see orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. I radio my dad and Frank to see if either of them were moving around. Dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank. I grab my binoculars out of my backpack to see if it was Frank. It's definitely not. The guy is looking at me through his scope, rifle fucking aimed directly at me. This is a huge no-no. Massive rules we have all learned in hunter's education. Never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens. My first thought was, what a fucking dickbag. Thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't put his gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking I was going to be the next hunting murder victim. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, and stand behind as many trees as I can. I walk down a little path on the side of my stand. My stand was on a kind of a little knoll on the side of a much larger hill. I radio my dad, telling him what's up. He tells me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that. Every time I looked, the guy was still aiming in my direction, but was always standing in a different spot. Like, I would look, go back to hiding, look again, and he would be 30 yards from where he was the last time. About 10 minutes of this goes by, when my dad radios me. "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he was obviously trying to keep me calm, but at the time, I thought he wasn't taking me seriously. He's still there, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is. My dad told me to keep hidden and he'll figure it out, that he would be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear a shot. I lost my shit trying to get hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where the fuck is he? Did he have to shoot the guy? What the fuck is going on? I sit there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. That felt like hours. Alright, come on out and head towards my stand. I peek over the little knoll I was behind and see my dad waving from alongside the ridge the random guy had been on. I make the trek on over to see what happened. Turns out, Frank was feeling a little restless and took a little stroll and ended up on the other side of the particular ridge that the stranger was on. Not knowing where he was, he had knocked his radio battery loose while getting situated earlier in the morning and had no idea anything was going on. The shot I heard was actually Frank shooting a deer. Dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off away from us towards the logging road. We helped Frank out with the deer and decided to call it a day. Although I was extremely nervous, the rest of the weeks went on with no incident. This all happened roughly 3 or 4 years ago, but the experience has haunted me almost every single day since it happened. I'll start off by saying, at the time, I was pretty young, single, and very keen to have my first experience with a guy. I spent a while looking through dating apps, talking to a few people until I finally came across a guy who seemed interesting, and we had a lot of things in common. I thought it would be a good idea to meet up with him since we had been talking for almost a month. Now, even though I was young, I wasn't naive or stupid. I was still somewhat very cautious and a paranoid person. But for some reason that day, I made what possibly could have been the worst decision of my life. I invited him to spend the night at my place. My parents were away for the weekend, and I had the place to myself. So it seemed like a perfect opportunity for him to come over. He lived about 3 hours away from my place, yet he was eager and almost desperate to come and see me. So he set off as soon as he finished work, which was around 11 a.m. The whole time he was driving to my place, I had a sickening sense of doom, almost as if something was going to go very, very wrong. I almost texted him multiple times telling him that I wasn't interested anymore, but I hesitated as he was only 10 minutes away by this point. I jumped when I heard the car pull up, and I expected to be greeted by a smile once I opened the door, but he just pushed his way through and continued to stare at me blankly. All while my 2 French bulldogs snarled and growled at him, which they never ever do to anyone. Things instantly seemed extremely odd. He followed me quickly to my bedroom and didn't waste any time aggressively undressing me, which I hesitantly went along with as this was my first experience with a guy, especially as he was almost 6 years older than me. Fast forward a couple hours later, he suddenly asked me if he could sleep in my room, which confused me as it was only 5 p.m. I told him it was fine, and I would continue watching a movie by myself downstairs. After an hour or two, I heard what sounded like furniture being moved around. I made my way upstairs and opened my door to find him crouching in the middle of my room and breathing extremely heavily. When I asked him if he was okay, he motioned for me to get on the bed, where he sat me on his lap and proceeded to place a blindfold over my eyes and put his hands around my neck lightly. I was already feeling extremely uncomfortable, which worsened as he tightened his grip around my throat and said, "Does anyone know I'm here? Do your friends know who I am and what I look like or anything?" I instantly answered saying my sister and friends who lived nearby knew. This was a complete lie, as I don't have a sister and my friends were unaware, but something inside me forced me to say it. After a few minutes of awkward silence, he stood up and gathered his thing, and I noticed that in his backpack he had tape, rope, and a handcuff, which at first didn't concern me as I knew he was into that stuff, but looking back, I think it was intended for something much worse. All of a sudden he said, "I think I'm gonna head home. I have a long drive and I'm rather tired." I didn't hesitate to let him out of my door as I was already extremely uncomfortable. As he left, he failed to make eye contact or say goodbye, and he raced off down the street as soon as he got into his car. I ran back into my room to check if he had left anything, as he left in a hurry, and found a note on my desk in the word, "Being nice is what saved you." At the time I had no idea what the note meant. Now that I think about it, I seriously think he had very ill intentions towards me. I'm still angry at myself for letting a stranger into my home, which is obviously a big mistake, and I immediately blocked him on all my social media. I'm just so lucky that I made it out alive. All I know is he's now somewhere back in America. I don't really know why he was in the UK at the time that I met him, but all I can say is I'm glad that he's now many miles away from me. I'm quarantined with my mom. We both are avoiding going out as much as possible because we're both compromised. So we just take short trips for any errands we need to complete in order not to go stir crazy. Today, she needed to get some gas and we needed a few groceries, so we both went. We saw my cousin at the gas station, and after I went to one of the pumps, I said hello while my mother went to go pay for gas. After she paid, I started pumping the gas, and we stood there chatting for a moment. When my cousin returned to the car, a man came out of the gas station. He was balding, unkempt, a patchy, short beard, and glasses, the kind you see in high school photos from the 80s. He was wearing a sort of tropical shirt with a notepad and pen in his pocket, and dirty khakis with a tan jacket. He stopped at my cousin's car and talked to her. She's kind of small, so I stood there watching until she got into her car safely, and I heard it start. My mom and I were pumping the last bit of gas into the car. Both of us didn't need to, but we both were glad to be outside for a moment. The guy walked up to us while she finished and said, "Are you having fun?" We kind of just glanced at each other and said, "Uh-huh," and swatted me to make me go to my side of the car. I didn't go. I didn't want to until she got into the car herself. The guy turned to me and said, "Are you having fun with your granddaughter?" As if he were trying to make a joke, but his facial expressions never changed. I just kind of gave him a blank stare and said, "That's my mom." I squeezed between him and the bumper and moved to my side of the car. He followed closely and said, "I just came here from Michigan. I haven't been here for 10 years. I got in and held onto my door. He stared at me for a while I was holding the door, then at my face again. He gave me a blank stare and said, "That's nice." My dog stuck his nose out and started barking at the guy. He's a 15-pound Yorkie, and he's usually sweet, but sounded like an angry guard dog while he was barking this time. "Is the dog having fun?" the guy asked. I held onto the door tighter and said, "I guess so. Have a nice day." I closed the door quickly, locked it, and my mom drove off, with my cousin following us. She had been there watching the entire time, waiting for either us or the guy to leave. My mom and I both remarked about how creepy the guy was, and thought he might try to jump into the car. I'm glad I went with her. This happened a few months ago. I was at a club for my friend's birthday, and we had a table with around a dozen friends with us. When we get there, a guy immediately starts hitting on me. He seemed super weird, and I had a boyfriend, so I politely declined his advances. Then shit got weird. While out, I feel like I see him everywhere, and it started to freak me out a bit. But at the time, I didn't have a sense of any danger. Fast forward an hour. I'm chatting with a friend from high school who happened to be the bartender. Creepy guy comes up and orders a drink for him and myself, which I decline, and explain to my bartender friend that we already have a table, so I'm good on drinks. Creepy guy did not like that. He gave me shit about not accepting his offer and that he was just trying to be nice. However, during his nice guy speech, he picked up my drink to refill it, which I again declined and asked him to excuse me while I chatted with my friend. I finished my drink, the one he picked up earlier, and finished it without thinking much more of the creeper. About 30 minutes later, I become sick and disoriented, and I had my friend help me to the restroom, since I felt so dizzy. After a while, I felt sick again, and my female friend was nowhere to be seen, so I walked myself to the bathroom. While waiting at the door, the creeper swooped in and held on to my waist very tight, and asked if I wanted to come to his table upstairs to meet his friend. I kept telling him no, that I needed to go back to my friend, and he began dragging me towards the stairs, telling me a list of disgusting, perverse things that I refused to write here. At that point, I was terrified, but my legs literally did not work. He was carrying me up the stairs. As soon as he got up there, he requested his valet to go home. At this point, I knew I was in danger, but my purse was missing, and so was my phone. While he's waiting outside, the bouncer makes a comment about my behavior, and the creep shrugs it off as too much alcohol. As we are waiting for the valet, 6 of my friends burst out from behind the door and began screaming at the creeper, while one of the female grabs me and pulls me back inside. I passed out soon after and woke up about 5 p.m. the next day on my friend's couch. I thought I had alcohol poisoning until I went to the emergency room and found out that I was drugged with ketamine while out the night before. This guy intended to drug me and take me home with him. Since then, I have refused to go out without my boyfriend always around me. I avoid that bar at all costs in case that creeper ever comes back. And I know to watch my drink like a hawk whenever I'm out. A valuable life lesson learned from a terrifying experience. When I was 13 years old, my family was robbed by my mom's ex-best friend. Before robbing us, they had broke in multiple times. One time, they left the front door open, and another, my mom opened the laundry room door, and as she did, the back door closed. Having these experiences, we changed the locks and made sure we locked the doors at night and armed the home alarm. The following year, the events in the story happened. For context, my family lived in a very bad area. People had been robbed, and some people had been assaulted or jumped, my brother included. My father is a truck driver, so my mother, brother, and I were usually home alone. My mom is someone who really enjoys watching the ID channel on TV. In fact, my town was once featured on one of the ID channel shows. Our town has such a high crime rate that a human trafficking ring was busted, and my mom's ex-best friend knew someone that was actually busted. The city I live in is the most dangerous in our country, and just yesterday we drove past a car dump. Earlier in this year, we had to call the cops twice. Once because we heard someone in the backyard, and another time because we heard gunshots. One night, my brother was asleep in the living room, and I was in my room. My mother was in her bedroom. I was on my phone at 1 a.m. because insomnia sucks. Suddenly, I heard the doorbell being rung frantically. My mom's a light sleeper, so she got up and went to the front door. She looked through the peephole of the door. I had walked out and she was standing there on her tiptoes at the front door. She was speaking to this guy behind the door. I heard a muffled guy's voice say, "My car's broken down. I need you to use your phone." My mom cleverly replied, "I'm sorry, I don't have a phone." She grabbed her phone after saying that. The man insisted and tried to open the door. He then got angry because the door was locked and started shouting. I went to my brother and woke him up. I told him to be quiet and we ran to the bathroom. My mom eventually joined us. We hid in the bathroom together and held on to each other. It felt like a lifetime in that bathroom. My mother was on the phone with 911 the entire time. I was making sure my brother remained quiet. When my mom told us that the cops were there, she made sure that when she heard them knocking, it was them. She gave them a statement. I couldn't hear it all because my brother and I were in the bathroom together. My mom told us that we could get out, and I immediately called my dad in tears. He answered, and I was crying so hard that my dad couldn't understand me, so I gave the phone to my mom. A while later, the cops came back and told my mother that they had got the guy, and he didn't even have a car. His intentions were probably to break in and rob us, or worse. So my city is under the state of emergency because of the whole COVID situation, and the streets are fairly dead, especially late at night, even though I live on a busy street. I was taking my dog out to go pee around 4:30 in the morning. Our backyard isn't fenced, so I basically take her out on a walk around the house. But when I get to the driveway, I saw a man on the side of the road just standing there, facing my direction. He was wearing all black, with a hoodie and the hood up because that's the creepiest thing you can do. So, of course, right? Anyway, I brush it off and just want my dog to pee quick so I can get inside. My dog is super reactive, and she doesn't notice him because she's too busy sniffing out where to pee. But then this guy starts snapping, like over and over again, snapping his fingers. Thankfully, my dog was still preoccupied, but I wasn't about to wait around for this weirdo to pull anything. So I turned around and walked back up my driveway. He's still snapping, but I swear, I hear him walking. I wasn't about to turn around to find out. I just booked it up the back steps and into my house. I told my roommate, and we were both pretty freaked out and started checking out all the windows, but he was nowhere to be found. My dog's been on guard since coming inside. She's running from the front door to the back door. If I ever get snapped at again, I'm moving out. This happened about 9 years ago. I was living with a roommate at the time in a townhouse in a suburb of Denver. My boyfriend at the time had always been kind of abusive, with the occasional slap or pinning me down on the floor. But after a family member that he was close to committed suicide, he really lost it. My ex, Pierce, just lost it in the middle of an argument one day, about a week after the funeral, and threw me onto the ground, punching my arm over and over again, until there was a giant bruise on one of my shoulders and a handprint-shaped bruise on the other. My face ended up being swollen, and I had a bloody lip. My roommate called the police, and he ended up being arrested, and a no-contact order was put in place. He was also ordered to go to counseling, and maybe drug and alcohol meetings, even though at the time he didn't use. Fast forward a few months. I'm living with this roommate because I was completely financially dependent on my ex. She had taken it upon herself to pay for me to get my GED. That woman is a saint. I just needed to throw that out there. A lot of time was spent on studying for the subjects. After everything, I was very agoraphobic, and I even managed to forge some online friends, and maybe even something more with a generally nice guy. One day, Pierce's grandma stopped by to take me to pay my phone bill. She lived close by in a small townhouse complex that was more or less behind where I lived. I remember it being the first beautiful and slightly warm day after a long winter. So I opened all the blinds to let the sunlight in and left them open when I left. After paying my bill, Pierce started calling her. I wasn't too concerned because I knew that he was supposed to be in court, mandated counseling shortly. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his grandmother told him that we had just stopped at McDonald's. Again, not an issue at this point. I continued to eat my Big Mac or whatever, until maybe 3 minutes later, Pierce calls again. His grandma tells him that she's probably going to go home in about 10 minutes. The call ends, I finish my food and we leave. Again, in the car, as I'm maybe 2 minutes away from where I live, Pierce calls again. I still can't hear his side of the conversation, but his grandma tells him the intersection we just passed, and suddenly, I have this terrible sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew something is wrong, but I can't identify what. I know in my heart of hearts that something was very wrong. I considered asking his grandmother for help, but for context, his grandmother, on multiple occasions, watched Pierce hit me and try to strangle me, and openly expressed disgust at how I can't help piss him off. This same lady that knew her daughter, Pierce's mother, broke Pierce's nose when he was 6, because he saw his mother flip someone off and copied her, and she did nothing to intervene. The family member Pierce was mourning for often told him he was fucked up and was probably more verbally and emotionally abusive person I've ever witnessed in my life, or in any movie, book, or whatever. So his family is just super fucked up and abusive. To other people, to each other. So I'm completely alone in this situation. Anyway, his grandmother pulls out in front of where I live, and I notice the blinds that I had left open are now closed. We go inside. Once she leaves, I walk upstairs to my room and see a random Word document open on my computer. Pierce had written a whole page worth of shit, but I only paid attention to the big words at the top. I read your emails. Immediately, I knew that he had seen the emails between me and the guy I met. Even though they weren't outright sexual or flirty, you could kind of tell that there was something there. My brain stopped reading at this point, and I needed to figure out if he was still in the building. Because there's a no contact order, I know he would have come in through the back door, so no one would see him. So my mind latches on to the idea that if the back door is locked, he is probably gone. I run downstairs to the door and see that it's locked. As soon as I reach the door, I hear a closet sliding open from the room I was just in. Loud angry footsteps, and he's yelling my name. I know this may sound weird, but I can't recall exact details. I remember his face in mind before I could understand what was happening. I remember being back in my room again, and I think to go through all the emails with him. And I remember him slapping me hard in my face until I got dizzy. I remember somehow convincing him to let me use my phone to respond to one of my roommate's texts. I don't remember what I said, but I remember that she called right away. I remember Pierce standing 2 feet away from me, looking at me, believing he was going to kill me, and my roommate asking me, "Are you safe?" I only said, "No." She told me that she was on her way and would be there as fast as she could. Eventually, Pierce became convinced that I had called the police, and with a knife in his hand, told me that if they were coming anyway, he might as well give me what I deserve. I managed to convince that I didn't call the police. Then he started crying about what a terrible person he was, and threatened to kill himself with that knife. So, with a handprint on my swollen face, I tried to convince him that he wasn't terrible and to please not kill himself, till my roommate came home. Insane ex-boyfriend. I've moved states, had my name changed, and only feel safe in buildings in big cities where I'm at least 3 stories up. Let's not ever meet again. This happened 2 summers ago. While I was house sitting out in California for an older couple, I had met at a conference for work. It seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats. I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, because I loved it so much the first time I had went. We figured we could mutually benefit if I came to house sit for them. I flew out there, and they showed me around for a few days. Taught me how to take care of their cats, 2 of them. One was extremely shy, and I barely saw, which is important later. Also, their plants, and gave me access to their house and cars. These people were so generous. Before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport, and was on my own. At first, it was really a dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and taking trips into San Fran, Sonoma, Monterey. In the morning, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the path surrounding the nearby Mountain Diablo, and was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there. Then one day, about halfway through the final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I made some food for myself, went to bed, and was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I had even seen her up close. The entire time I had been there up to this point, she never left the host's bedroom, unless I wasn't around. Again, I ignored feeling weird, and just assumed that she decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that halfway through the night that I heard someone walking around the gravel outside my window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else, and I went back to sleep. The day after in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping, and had an overall great day. When I got home to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower, second lock, and that's the only lock my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So I had to call my host to find a hide-a-key which, safety-wise, was buried a whole foot underneath a bush outside, and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that, went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did. But with a different door. This time, I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back in the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty unnerved. My own cats are whack, so I think in my mind I was trying to come up with a way that the cats could be locking me out of the house, but I was coming up empty. I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked and just wrote it off and started triple checking the locks when I went out of the house or into the garage. That night when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, but again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful, nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in for Netflix for a day. The vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyways. But as the day went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into a feeling of being watched. After mid-afternoon, I got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple of food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach. And as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening." I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier, because I just had this thought that this might be the last person to ever say that to me. When I got to my car, I was still crying and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I could not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself, after about a half an hour, to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would be able to get over it and be able to at least go in and feed the cats, and then maybe I'd go stay at a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me go inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house and say I already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone leave the house. So I faced inside the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and did just that. The second I finished saying, "They're almost here. If you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in the host room turned on, and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to my car and called the police for real. I proceeded to leave and have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the entire house and didn't find anyone, but the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open, and there's a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that, based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. They said they could not prove that anyone was there. There was no sign of forced entry, and we couldn't get hold of the host immediately to verify if anything had been taken. So they said that they would patrol a bit, but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in the host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So basically, I think the intruder had been there for at least 2 days, forcing the cat to choose between two strangers, and leading her to choose the one that was least strange, which was me. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person, and I still had to stay in the house over the next 3 days. Nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel like anything was off for the rest of the time I was there. But the damage was done. I never felt completely safe in that house without doing a complete search before bedtime, but I'm extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. This happened when I was around 12 years old. It was the middle of the night at my house. My dad worked the graveyard shift at his work. Since it was the weekend, I stayed up most of the night. It was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and my dad told me to lock the doors and go to sleep, which I did. I went into my room and finally went to sleep, but only for about an hour. Around 2 a.m. I woke up to the sound of knocking on my back door. It scared me awake. After a few moments to process what I heard, I decided it was probably just my dad knocking on the door. Maybe he forgot something. Me being really exhausted, I knew he had a house key on him, so I just told myself he'll unlock the door himself. The knocking continued. It was pretty creepy. Then the next thing I knew, the knocking stopped. Then it started again, but at a different location. Someone was knocking on the window in my kitchen. I continued to assure myself that it was just my dad, but I didn't understand why he couldn't unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him. I felt pretty freaked out, and I definitely was not answering the door. If anything, my dad would have called me to open the door for him, and my phone was next to me. The knocking started again, at another window. I was terrified now, too scared to get up and check who was out there. The knocking wasn't stopping, and the next thing I know, the knocking moved to the front door, at a louder level too. That's when it hit me that I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't scream or talk, or even move a muscle. My heart was dropping as the knocking moved to another window, closer and closer to my bedroom window, where my curtains were see-through. I still couldn't move. I didn't know what to do or say. I could only sit there as the fear consumed me. I moved my eyes over to the window and my heart stopped when I saw a man peering through. A tall man in a dark ski mask. I could hardly make out any details because it was so dark. I think his mask had some sort of skeleton design on it. He tilted his head slightly, and I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I closed my eyes and started telling myself, it's not real, over and over again. I opened my eyes and there was no one there. I sighed in relief until I heard a loud whisper say, "I'll cut you." Everything suddenly stopped. I really couldn't sleep anymore that night. It didn't feel like a dream, and I've never experienced sleep paralysis before. Everything felt so real. I don't know what had happened, but I pray that I'll never experience anything like that again. It was one of the most frightening moments of my life. The following morning, I asked my dad if he came back from work and if he was knocking on the doors and windows. He said he didn't. I'm a 25-year-old female. Last Friday I had a little time to kill before picking up my kids from school. It was a gorgeous day, so I decided to spend some time cruising the back roads in my hometown, listening to music. I passed a guy with his thumb out, trying to catch a ride, and I almost picked this guy up. He looked to be in his late 30s, early 40s, carrying a fishing pole and a backpack. Pretty innocent looking, I guess. But see, I'm alone, female, and have been taught with the hundreds of hitchhiker gone wrong stories that you should just keep driving. So I kept driving. And as I'm driving, I'm having an internal dialogue of guilt about my decision not to pick this guy up. You know, if I was hitchhiking, I'd hope someone would pick me up. I mean, really, what's the worst thing that could happen? That mixed with my new self-improvement goal of doing things that scare me as often as possible led me to the conclusion that if when I loop back around and he's still walking, I would pick him up. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous pulling over getting him, but what was I gonna do? Peel out when he's trying to get in my vehicle? As soon as he gets in, I realized I probably made a horrible mistake. 1. Because he seemed like he was tweaking balls and smelled god-awful. 2. Because this guy was looking at me like I was a feast and he was starved. I didn't realize exactly how rattled I was with my decision until he asked me for a smoke and my hands were shaking so bad that I barely pulled one out of the pack without breaking it. Driving made it easier to hide my nerves, but I was internally freaking out and trying to decide how I would beat this guy's ass if he tried anything. His name was Wayne, and he lives 5 minutes from where I picked him up. Meanwhile, he's telling me that he lost his license due to DUIs, and that he's living in this house with this old man. He was also trying to talk me into hanging out at said house with him, and come over to drink with him the next day. When I finally get to his destination, it's a little shack-like thing surrounded by these junky cars and shit. He gets out and is still trying to convince me to come inside with him. I tell him no, and leave. I'm feeling relieved and a little bit proud that I faced a fear of mine. Fast forward to Monday. My instructor says, "Holy shit, apparently someone got murdered down that back road. Do you know anyone down that way?" I said, "Wow, you know, that's ironic. I took a hitchhiker down that road Friday. His name was Wayne, I think." It wasn't even 15 minutes later when I see Wayne's picture on Facebook saying that the police had picked him up for stabbing someone to death in the very house I dropped him off on Friday. Graphic information of how he stabbed him in the lungs and let the victim bleed out in the little shack. And the old man he was living with didn't even exist. I swear, I'm never picking up a hitchhiker again in my life. Okay, so a little backstory. I go to a high school with about 500 people. This happened during my sophomore year. I'm a junior now. This might not be as extreme as other stories, but this is something that still terrifies me, even a year later. Mark had other issues before this happened. He started cutting his arms in class. I was sitting 2 seats over from him and just watched the blood roll down his arm. He ended up being reported to the office and was sent to the YOC for about a month. The YOC is a Youth Opportunity Center. It's basically a mental hospital, juvie center, for kids. He came back and seemed to be fine. He said he was never suicidal and that he only cut his arms for attention, which made sense for him because of his kind of messed up childhood. On the day that everything happened, I had no clue about anything. During my 6th-hour class, the school resource officer appeared at the door of my classroom. One of my friends was standing right behind him. The SRO told my teacher that he needed me immediately. I had no clue what was going on. I just thought I was randomly getting drug tested, which is pretty common in my school. I tried asking why we were going to the office and got no response. He took the 2 of us into a conference room where 2 police officers were standing. They questioned me first. As I walked in the room, he shut and locked the door behind me. One of the police officers blocked the door and the other one blocked the window. I was petrified. I had no clue what was happening. This conversation ensued. No, the SRO was confrontational and aggressive throughout this entire conversation. "Have you heard anything today?" "About what?" "There were threats made against our school. Your name came up in conversation." "What do you mean my name came up in conversation? I haven't heard anything. Who made the threats, and who said I would know anything about it?" "Mark made the threats. We questioned some other people, and your name popped up. They said you might know something." "Who said my name?" "We can't tell you." I understand that they probably couldn't tell me who said it due to confidentiality reasons, but it was so frustrating being locked in there with police officers who are acting like I've done something wrong. especially when I hadn't. To this day, I still have no clue who mentioned my name. Back to the conversation. I have heard nothing. The only class I have with him is in 5th period, and he wasn't there today. We don't talk outside of class, and the only reason we talked in class was because we sat at the same table, so we would have to work together some days. Are you sure? I'm positive. I don't know anything. All of this is news to me. Okay, you're free to go. They opened the door, took my friend in, and I went back to class. I was kind of in shock. As soon as I walk in through the class door, everyone is bombarding me with questions about what had just happened. I ignored them and put my head down for the rest of the class. Later that night, I saw on Facebook that the school had posted a message. I don't remember what it was exactly due to it being deleted, but from what I remember it was something like, "Parents and students. 2 students reported that threats were made against our school. We handled the situation and there is nothing to worry about." The actual post was longer, but I honestly don't remember. I told my parents everything that had happened that day, and they immediately wanted more information. I couldn't give it to them. At that point, I didn't know about the hit list or his arrest. All I knew was that he had threatened to shoot up the school. The next day, shit hit the fan. I found out that he had told people about his plans during the first hour, and that he was taken out of class and arrested during our 4th hour. He was gonna do it during our 5th hour, starting with the class that he was in, which I was in too, and then he would head over to the cafeteria. I still get chills when I think about it this very moment. During lunch, my best friend came up to me and told me about the hit list Mark wrote and showed her during the first hour. She didn't get a chance to tell me the day before. The other guy who was there confirmed everything. I was on it. I was the 3rd name down. Evidently, he described it in detail of how he would kill me. Luckily, someone stopped it from happening, or else I would be dead before I got to graduate high school. To this day, I don't know why he wanted to kill me. I barely even spoke to this guy. I was polite in class if I ever had to work with him. We had no negative interactions, so I honestly had no clue what I did to make him so desperately want me dead. As I understand, he had a gun in his locker. It wasn't a joke like his friends thought. He intended to do it. I'm relieved that I'm alive and nothing happened, but I was also out of my mind with horror at the thought of someone plotting my death. About 2 weeks later, my dad and I go into the Dollar General in our town. Keep in mind, my dad has no clue what Mark looks like. We walk in and buy something for dinner, and I see Mark. He's staring at me so intensely that I wanted to run out of the store. I stuck close to my dad and told him to hurry. He looked at me confused, and I told him I would explain later. Mark followed us around the store, and I couldn't breathe. I don't have words to describe how scared I was. My dad and I got what we needed, left the store, and got into the truck. As soon as I was in the truck and the doors were locked, my dad turned to me and asked, "Who was that? He looked like he wanted you dead." I replied that was Mark. At this point, we were thoroughly panicked, not only because he's roaming free, but because he knew where I lived. We had security cameras, but knowing that this person has expressed the desire to kill you and knows where you live is just terrifying. The school has since acted like nothing happened. In fact, one of the administrators told me that my family was overreacting when we wanted to know if he would be back in school, because according to them, I was never in any real danger. Luckily, the kid is no longer at my school and is currently in jail because he murdered his mother. He pushed her down the stairs and she was found dead, wrapped up. Thankfully he was caught, and I don't think he's getting out anytime soon. This occurred in 2017 and is 100% true. Due to the multitude of factors, including the recent death of a close friend, I was depressed at this time of my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was the off-season. It was late November. The weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island. So we immediately check into our motel, though that word hardly does this place justice. I call it a motel because the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality, our room was one of 20 to 30 quaint guest house looking buildings arranged in some sort of horseshoe shaped around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given. Essentially at the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led to the street, the other further into a secluded maze of rooms. One day after exploring, and just having finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Almost as dark as my headspace after the dinner conversation took a left-hand turn and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them that I just needed to sleep. I did, immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up with my mom saying my name in a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door, and mine further into the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I don't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggily, I rolled over. "What?" I asked, as my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming through the curtains. I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who is she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. Understand how horrifically startling it was to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. Life isn't like movies, where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream. Sometimes the only thing that comes out is something panicked and guttural. My mom's words became low as she said my dad's name in a dire voice that I had never heard her use before. Then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I can understand. As opposed to the infinite moment of the figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfold when my hawking, ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly we went out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom screaming, "Get him! Get him!" My dad running down the path of the horseshoe, further into the hotel, shouting through the sheer adrenaline, "I'm gonna fucking kill you!" I ran down the other path towards the street. When I got there was no sign of the intruder. It became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quickly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me, and I hear him say, "It's a fucking kid." The explanation, some young teen, tall and lanky, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room. Our room. The one time my parents had happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered, and seeing a tall person in a hoodie, she thought it was me, assuming that I left the room in a depressive episode. When the hooded figure crouched, that was him realizing the mistake and panicking. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs this kid, who is now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So I'm a 23-year-old female. I live in a townhouse with my 2 children, 2 years and a 6-month-old. My fiance did live with us until 2 weeks ago when I caught him trying to get with other women, and I made him move out. That's important to the story. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and when he did live with us, my ex worked evenings. Let me set the scene. We live in a tiny town in northern Pennsylvania. My line of townhouses sit in front of a big field that runs to a line of woods. As far as I'm aware, those woods stretch for at least a few miles, and I'm not aware of any houses in there or any roads that lead through them. My living room has 3 windows that look onto the field, and my bedroom on the second floor only has 1 window that faces that way as well. People tend to walk their dogs back in the fields, and kids sometimes play back there, but I rarely see anyone close to my house. For that reason, I tend to leave my blinds and curtains open because I enjoy the view. So in July of 2019, I was laying on my bed trying to fall asleep. All the lights were off, but I had my window and blinds open since it was so warm. I was looking out the window and I noticed a small red and white light just outside. I got up and looked to realize that the lights were coming from a drone. I ran downstairs to where my fiancé at the time was sitting in the living room and ran to the window. I told him what I saw, but of course, when he went out to look, it was gone. I was kind of paranoid that the drone could have had a camera on it and someone could be watching me with it. I kept my blinds closed for a while after that. Fast forward to January of this year. I guess I stupidly got comfortable and assumed that whoever it was flying the drone was just a one-time creep. My blinds were open and I had just gotten out of the shower. I was sitting on my bed, pretty much naked except for my underwear, scrolling on my phone, when out of the corner of my eye I saw the lights again, out of my dark window. It was that damn drone again. I ran out of the room and waited a few minutes. I peeked back into my room and it was gone. I quickly shut my blinds and got dressed. Honestly, I felt sick at how stupid I was to leave my windows open again, especially when I was practically naked. Now for the really disturbing part. My 2-year-old son and I were out on the fields 2 weeks ago, 3 days after I kicked out my fiancée. Probably about a half hour after we'd been out there, I heard a slight whirling noise coming towards us. I looked up and it was that damn drone flying towards us. I looked around and didn't see anyone. It stopped right over us. I freaked out and grabbed my son and dragged him into the house, looking back at the tree line every so often as we went. I knew they had to have been hiding in there. I went inside, closed the blinds, and called my mom and told her about the situation. She told me to just keep an eye out. My son likes to line his toys up along the windowsill, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to have them open just an inch or so. A little while later, after we ate dinner and it was almost dark, I was feeding my 6-month-old and my son was playing. He was standing over by the window, lining up his toys. He started saying, "Dada, Dada." I assumed that he was just missing his father and dismissed him by saying he was going to see him this weekend. He kept saying, "Dada, Dada." I looked up and saw him pointing out the window, under the little gap that the blinds didn't cover. I froze. I remember that he calls any man with facial hair Dada, because it reminds him of his own father. But there was no way someone would be bold enough to actually come up to my window. Not when my neighbors are literally right there. Anyone could see them. But there aren't really any lights back there, so unless someone actually stepped out of their house, I guess no one would actually see them. Maybe it was my ex, but he should have been at work at that time. I ran to the window and moved my son. I didn't want to lift the blinds, but honestly, I was sure that it had to be the person who was creeping on me for the past year, and wanted to see who it was. I pushed the blinds up, and was looking at a man who I definitely never seen before. He was crouching in front of me. He was bald, with a mustache and a goatee. I have no idea how old he was. He could have been anywhere from 30 to 50. When he saw me, he smiled and stood up. I yelled and told him to fuck off and that I was calling the cops. He just stood there, smiling at me, like some freak. I was about to close the blinds again when he said something I couldn't hear. I told him to leave again and he said, "I just want to talk to you." I shook my head no and yelled the same thing to him. He started slapping his hands on the window, yelling, "No, no, no," over and over. I grabbed my phone, scared that he was going to try to break in. I dialed 911. My kid was crying from the yelling, and I felt on the verge of tears. I told the operator what was going on. The whole time I was on the phone, the man was pounding on my window, screaming. He was yelling all kinds of nonsense, and I only caught some of it. He said that he's been watching me for months, that I'm beautiful. He wants me to come with him, and that he'll kill my children if I don't. The operator told me to go into the upstairs room and hide until the police arrive. My town doesn't have a police department, so we rely on the state police. She said it would be about 20 minutes, but to stay on the phone with her. The man was practically punching the window now, and was just screaming like a maniac. I was about to grab my kids and run upstairs when I heard someone else screaming. The man bolted. I looked out to see my neighbor and his girlfriend. I opened the window, and my neighbor said that he heard the man, so he ran around the building. He said when the guy heard him, that he ran back into the woods and disappeared into the tree line. They said they had also called the police. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did a quick search around the building and in the trees, but obviously didn't find anything. I've been super paranoid since, and stayed with my parents for a few nights after it happened. I don't know why this guy targeted me, or why he waited so long to do something. I'm just happy that my neighbors were there to intervene, or God knows what would have happened. When I was 15, my mom, my younger sister and I were living in a not so nice apartment. My mom took the couch and my sister and I got the bedrooms. I got first choice, so obviously I chose the one with a window. So there was a main floor to the building, which was the lobby, and then the floor above it, which was considered the first floor. I mention this because every other apartment I lived in, the first floor was the first floor. Outside the apartment windows was a fire escape with a landing on the first floor above the lobby. It was summer, about 4 a.m. I was laying in bed trying to sleep with the lights off. From the moonlight, I noticed something outside my window. Then, a flashlight clicks on, and it's a man maybe in his late 30s. I threw my blanket over my face and didn't move because I was terrified. He starts looking around my room with a flashlight, which felt like minutes, but in reality was probably only 60 seconds. Then he just left. I don't know where he went, and as far as I know, he didn't come back. The next morning when I leave the building, police were there, and there was a pile of blood on the stairs between the lobby and first floor. I have no idea if it was related, and it's been about 15 years, so I'm not sure if I'll ever know. But to the man with a flashlight outside my window, let's not meet again. For some background, I live in the UK, and I go to a school with a uniform. I go to a large all-girls school, with about 8 classes of 30, and I've heard about creeps lingering outside the school before, but they are usually sorted out quite quickly by the school staff. At the time, I was in year 9, so about 13 years old, and only about 4'9". I had a big homework assignment due, and because I didn't have a computer at home, I stayed late at the school to do it in the ICT suite. As it was the beginning of the school year, it was relatively dark at 5 p.m., which is when I got out of school, and this event took place. I had to get the bus home, as both my parents were working. The bus stop outside my school was fairly busy. There was a couple of other people and me. I had my back up against the fence and noticed a man under the bus stop, facing away from, but next to, the road and opposite the fence I was leaning on. I was aware of my surroundings, as I've had previous experiences with old creeps, and I'm just a generally paranoid person. The man didn't strike me as particularly interested, but I did notice him glance over at me from the corner of my eye. I then saw a bus and assumed it was mine, so I stepped forward to check. It was not my bus, which was annoying as I was cold and I didn't have a coat. As I went to step back against the fence, I almost stood back into the man that was under the bus stop originally, but he had moved directly behind me. He had his arm up against the pole next to the bus stop. I felt a bit concerned, but couldn't move as the other side of me had all the people waiting to get on the bus that was coming. It felt like forever, as I could feel the man's breath on top of my head come and collect all the other people at the bus stop. Once the last person got on the bus, I quickly moved out of the man's area and back to the fence. he also moved, so he was back under the bus stop, sitting across from me, staring at the ground. At last, my bus came after about 3 minutes like that. I didn't want to give away the fact that I was getting on the bus, but I had to wave it down, so I stood next to the road to signal it over. As I got on, my heart was really going, as the man was back right behind me. I had already got my bus card out and scanned it very quickly, and only saw a few people downstairs. Normally there might be a few people upstairs, so that's where I headed. That was probably my biggest mistake. I got up there and it was completely empty. Well, I couldn't really go back down at this point, but I knew the man had already gotten on and would most likely be coming upstairs. I did the next best thing. I sat in the outside seat directly in front of the bus camera, which I kept looking directly at just in case something happened. The man came upstairs, as expected, and he sat at the back of the bus, not before looking and smiling at me as he passed. It was then that I had the idea that probably saved me. I live on a quiet street, and it's already dark now, so there was no way I was getting off the bus at my stop with this man. I pulled out my phone and earbuds. I put one of the earbuds in my ear and text my friend to play along when I FaceTime her and informed her about my situation. She understood and, along with some small talk, I talked loudly about how my mom was mad that I stayed late at school and that she texted me saying that she was waiting at the door for me and that I told her that I was only 10 minutes away. In reality, I told my mom that I was staying late that morning before I left for school, and my mom was at work 45 minutes away, and so was my dad, about an hour and a half away, which limited their access to either of their phones. The bus was at my stop to get off now, and I took a deep breath and stood up. I looked back at the man, and he was looking at me as I walked down the stairs. My friend was screen recording at this point, just in case something went down. Thankfully, he didn't follow me down the stairs. But as I was walking off the bus, I looked back to see him against the back window, hands and fists staring at me. That is when I took my flimsy school shoes off and sprinted to my house, as the next bus stop was still in eyesight. There were 2 main roads that led down to my street. Once I was down my street and far enough away that you couldn't see the top of it anymore, I told my friend about him being up against the window. I put my shoes back on and sped walked the rest of my way to my house. My family still doesn't know anything about this, though I was quite proud of myself of the way I handled the situation and how I ran with no shoes on.